Two Kittens presents the Broken Bones Horror Theatre. When you're listening to the radio or music, do you stop to think how the sound got like that? Of course you don't. But what do you do if nothing sounds right? You call a sound engineer and hopefully they'll work out what's wrong. Hopefully. Ed Brackenbury thinks he understands sound. At least, that's the theory.
It is early afternoon when Ed Brackenbury disembarks at Scott Scalder Station. To say the station is remote is a gross understatement. Even for the Scottish Highlands, the tiny, seldom-used station is isolated. It's on the mainland, but only just. Ed watches the train trundle off into the distance as he stands on the platform beside a small suitcase. The luggage says a lot about Ed. It is old-fashioned and a bit battered. A striped cloth belt keeps the contents inside, and it's heavier than it needs to be. Picking it up, he turns and heads for the exit. Outside the station sits a single taxi. The driver's leaning on the bonnet, smoking. "Afternoon, where are you going?" "Good afternoon, I'm going to Bendore." "Bendore, hey? Are you to do with the radio? There's not much else up there." "Well, yes, sort of. Will you take me there?" "I get in." The driver takes the case from Ed and puts it in the boot of the car. Ed gets in the back. "How far is it?" "Not far, well, not in miles, but in other ways it's a long way off. Where are you staying?" Ed reaches into his pocket and pulls out a rumpled piece of paper and hands it to the driver. The driver glances at the address and passes it back to his passenger. "Oh, you're staying there, are you?" "Is there a problem?" Ed asks. "No, no problem." The driver starts the engine, checks his mirrors, and heads for the tower. The Bendore transmitter is the only radio mast for miles and miles. Its position on top of the mull means that it has a reach that far outweighs its size. On a good day, the signal can be picked up in the Faroe Islands. Usually the transmitter simply relays local community radio stations, who share the available airtime between themselves. The output is steady, worthy, and a bit boring, but provides a lifeline to the isolated Highland communities that would otherwise have to rely on crackly shortwave radio for their news and entertainment. 30 minutes later, the taxi pulls up at the transmitter. Next to it is a porta-cabin. It's grubby and the windows are barred. A small ramp with a wobbly handrail leads to the entrance. "Would you mind waiting?" Ed asked the driver. "I want to be sure I can get in." "Aye, I'll wait." The driver turns off the engine, leans out of the window, and lights another cigarette. Ed fishes for his keys in his pocket. He sifts through the bundle until he finds the one with BD-A written on it in grubby Tipex. He approaches the porta-cabin and tries the key in the door. It's very stiff. It barely moves when he tries to turn it. He's a little concerned about breaking the key off in the lock. Abruptly, the driver appears behind him and shakes a can of WD-40 next to his ear. "Here you go, sonny. There's a lot of weather up here. We're always doing this." He waves the plastic straw at the lock and gives it a couple of firm squirts. Some of the liquid hits Ed's hand and runs down his arm. The smell is distinctively strong. He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a tissue, and wipes the fluid from his arm. Gradually, the lock begins to move. The driver gives it another long squirt and turns the key vigorously back and forth until, with a click, the door opens. "There. That'll give you 9 more trouble while you're here." "Thank you," Ed replies awkwardly. Squeezing past the driver, he enters the cabin. "I'll be off now then, will I?" The driver hovers by the door. "What? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Ed pays the driver the fare and gives him a tip. Thank you for waiting and helping with the door. Do you have a card? I'm going to need collecting in a day or two. The driver fishes around in his jacket pocket and produces a crumpled card. He straightens it out as best he can. It's covered with what smells like engine oil and is badly creased. Here you go. The driver hands Ed the oily card. Leave a message if I'm not there and I'll come and get you. Thank you, Ed mumbles. Ed looks down at the brown Bakelite phone on the desk. The body is chipped and the dial is starting to rust. I'll call you on that. You sure it still works? Ed picks up the handset and holds it to his ear. He can hear a dial tone. Yes, it sounds like it. He blows into the mouthpiece. Yes, I can hear myself, so I'm going to say it's working. On your head be it. The driver deadpans as he leaves. Ed closes the door. The wind is really getting up now, and it's starting to get dark. He takes another piece of paper from his pocket and reads the instructions. Making his way to the desk, he sits behind it and feels for the top drawer in front of him. He pulls it open with both hands and looks inside. The drawer is empty, save for another key. A cruddy string attaches a dog-eared paper tag to the key. On it, the single word, cabin, is scrawled in spidery red ink. Ed takes the key from the drawer and leaves the porta-cabin. At the threshold, he tries the key in the door a few times, just to be sure he can open it again. Once satisfied he can re-enter, he pulls the door to and locks it behind him. He traverses the short distance to the old stone bothy that will be his home for the next few days. Ed now finds himself alone in the Scottish Highlands, following a curious set of coincidences that began 6 months earlier. By trade, Ed is a sound technician. He had always been fascinated by sound. The greatest gift he received as a child was a solid Sony portable TC92 cassette tape quarter, as it was awkwardly named, that he got for his 9th birthday. His favorite part of it was the big red record button. Pushing this button was like opening a portal to another universe. It was a place Ed visited frequently. His obsession with sound had meant that he got very good at working with it. So good, in fact, that as an adult he found himself working on studio sessions for some of the biggest artists of the day. What these huge stars, or rather the suits that paid his wages, liked about working with Ed was that he was so straight. He'd always be on time for work. He was never drunk, high, or on drugs, or unreliable. When you hired Ed, you got work done. It was on one of these jobs during some downtime that Ed made a rare foray into the daylight. The studio was very hot and thick with smoke from about 100 joints, and he needed some air. He opened the back door to the studio and wedged it open with a crate that was kept solely for this purpose. He stretched his arms and was about to sit down when a loud, "Careful, man," came from behind him. There, sitting on the low wall behind the door, was a wizened old man, clutching what was clearly a small joint between his yellowing fingers. "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there." "No worries, hombre. I was sort of hiding anyway." The man spoke in a soft brogue that seemed quite at odds with his appearance. Ed hesitated for a moment before asking, "Why are you hiding?" "I'm their roadie." He waves his thumb over his shoulder, back towards the studio. "They're all so mince now. If they see me, they'll just want me to go and get more drugs, and to be honest, I'm getting a bit too old for all this. So I'll just hide here until they pass out." "Fair enough. It won't be long the way they're going. I don't see the fun in it myself. They're paying a lot of money to be here, and as far as I can hear, 95% of what they're recording is incoherent noise. I'm glad I'm not paying for it, is all I can say. I don't know why they came here, to be honest. There's just too many distractions." The old man takes another big lug of his spliff. "That reminds me of a tale I heard a while back." "Oh, yes?" Ed's not really listening. He glances at his watch. "Yeah, it's an odd one." Ed's ears prick up slightly at this. "What do you mean?" Ed, for all of his straightness, loves a good mystery. And while he doesn't 100% buy into all the odd stories he's heard over the years, especially from musicians and assorted hangers-on, he was still interested to hear them. "Well, I'm not sure I should tell you. It's such a weird story, I don't know if I believe it or not." "Go on, I'm all ears." "Okay then, but don't blame me if it gives you nightmares." He wags a skeletal finger at him. Ed stifles a laugh, like he's going to be worried about an old stoner's fever dreams. The veteran stagehand repeatedly flicks at his lighter until it sparks into life. The joint is rotated in the flame till it's fully alight. Rhodey takes a drag and blows a plume of pungent smoke over in Ed's direction. Well, this is what I heard. I don't know if it's true, but it still gives me the creeps. Around 10 years ago, a local band decided, like you said, that there were just too many distractions in the city. They needed to finish their second album. The first had been a big hit, but they were struggling with a difficult second album. A cliche, I know, but happens to be true a lot of the time, if you think about it. The first album might have taken years to write, adding songs over time, perfecting them, honing them, shaping an album. It gets released and everybody loves it. They tour for a couple of years and everyone's happy. Then it comes to the second album, but you got no songs left. You might have a few half ideas, but you quickly find you're 2.5 years in and you've suddenly got to produce an album out of thin air. And it's got to be at least as good as the first one you spent years perfecting. It's no wonder some of them struggle. Anyway, they weren't getting anywhere down here. So the lead singer hears about this really isolated place in Scotland. It's got a small radio transmitter and an old stone bothy next to it. Immediately he thinks that this is the solution to their problems. And he persuades the other band members that this is going to be the perfect place to finish the album. It's 10 years earlier and the band are sitting on the low wall outside the same studio. They're all smoking. It's the beginning of autumn. The sun is bright and just starting to lose its heat in the day. But it's not quite cold enough to drive them inside while they smoke. Really? What about Montserrat? I hear that's really nice this time of year. Dude, the Highlands of Scotland in September? I vote Montserrat. Yeah, me too, the drummer chips in. Band meeting. The singer arrives, late as ever. What? We're having it. Not without me, you're not. Come on then, what is it? Scotland, he begins. The others give a collective groan. Hear me out. I'd love to go to the Caribbean and finish the record, but I'm pretty sure that all we would end up doing is more booze and drugs. We'd be no closer to finishing the record than we would if we stayed here. Plus, we'd have spent all the money we made from the first album. We'll go to Montserrat for the next one, I promise. The band looked at each other. They knew once he made up his mind there really wasn't much point in arguing further. He just threatened to leave, like he does every time he can't get his own way. They'd all end up giving in anyway, so why bother with the bother? One day they'd call his bluff, but that day wasn't today. Besides, he was essentially correct, and they all knew it. A reluctant message was sent to their manager for him to arrange it. Within a week, they were all on a train, headed north. What about the kit? Bravo's arranged for that to be sent ahead. He's hired a portable mixing desk, and the studio is being set up now. It should be all waiting for us. How much is this all costing? Asked the bass player. Less than one ticket to Montserrat, the singer pings back. Where are we going to sleep? I've seen a picture of this place. It's tiny. Even without all the gear in there, it won't fit us all in. Don't worry, there's a couple of caravans. We'll have to share, but that should give us more reason to finish the album, so we can get back to civilization even quicker. No one liked the sound of this. They hadn't shared rooms for a couple of years, and they weren't keen to go back to it. But then again, he was right. Anything to get this fucking record finished. When they arrived at the station, the taxi had to make 2 trips to get them to their makeshift recording studio. It was literally in the middle of nowhere. Fucking hell, who thought this was a good idea? The 5 of them stood outside the bothy, looking like they've just been beamed down from outer space. There were the 4 members of the band and the sound engineer. They left the producer in London. He was a dick, and they decided to produce the last few tracks themselves. If they fucked it up, then at least they'd have the tapes and they could play around with them when they got back home. The next day, after a damp, cold, uncomfortable night, the 5 of them coughed and spluttered and shuffled into the studio. The studio was a single room. Its damp walls were hung with thick blackout curtains and an old, heavy woolen rug covered the floor. Somehow a portable mixing desk had been squeezed in through the old, narrow door. Cables and stands of various uses were laid out. The drums were placed in a rickety booth that looked like it was just about to fall over. A generator, positioned some way away outside, supplied the power the local grid was incapable of providing. The sound guy lit the wood burner in the corner of the room, and they all huddled around it, nursing tepid tea, trying to warm up. I'm not so sure this is a good idea. I'm fucking freezing and it's so damp. I don't feel very rock and roll. Come on, man, where's your sense of adventure? The drummer parked himself on his drum stool, picked up his sticks, and started playing. He was soon joined by the bass player and guitarist as they began to jam out the tune that they'd been struggling with for a few weeks now. Gradually, they started to sound like a band, rather than four people with instruments they couldn't work out how to play. The engineer clapped his headphones tightly to his ears, as if struggling to hear something. The others noticed and stopped playing. What's up? I don't know, there's just a lot of noise in the room. I wouldn't say it was that bad. Shut up, Sammy, idiot. Obviously not that sort of noise. There's something in the background. I'm struggling to hear it. Is it the Jenny? No, it's not that. Sounds like it's coming from within the room. The guitarist chips in. Play it back! The engineer rewinds the tape and plays it over the monitors. Under the sound of the band, you could just about hear a murmuring. It's incredibly indistinct and could easily just be tape noise. Can you hear that? The engineer is very sure he can hear something. Sound engineers are trained to hear noises that others miss. It's an important part of their job, to spot these sounds and eliminate them from recordings. Yeah, but does it matter? Asked the drummer. The engineer lifts his eyes from the mixing desk and glares at the drummer. No, none of it matters. In fact, why am I even here? I seem to be wasting my fucking time stuck up here in the middle of fucking nowhere with a bunch of talentless, cloth-eared losers. I may as well just leave the tape running and fuck off back to London right now. Sorry, dude. I didn't mean to... Fucking amateurs. Tell me why am I even bothering? Stupid me. These sessions just engineer themselves, don't they? Well, go on then. Off you go.
And with that, he flicks the tape machine on to record, picks up his coat and fags, and leaves the room, slamming the door behind him.
Fuck's sake, Dave. Why'd you have to go and say that? You know how temperamental he is. Brian lays down his guitar and pulls on his coat. I'll go get him. I suggest we take a break. The remaining members look at each other and decide now would be a good time to go look for some food. They head back to the caravan and see if there's anything for lunch. Around an hour and a half later, the engineer has been persuaded to return. They've all had some food, which has helped lower the temperature in the room. Did no one switch this off? What? The tape. It's been rolling the whole time. Just rewind it, dude. Keep the first bit from the morning, though. That was getting somewhere. They all nod in agreement. The engineer rewinds the tape. After several attempts, he gets to the point in the tape where they decide to have lunch, and they can hear themselves leaving the room. He's just about to stop it when a voice comes on the speaker. They all immediately stop what they're doing and look at the engineer. What the fuck was that? Then there's another voice. It sounds like it's answering the first voice. They all get to their feet. What the fuck is going on? Who else is here? No one is here. It's just us. There's no one around for miles. Well, then who the fuck is talking? There's no doubt now. There's definitely someone talking on the tape. What are they saying? I can't make it out. The tape conversation continues. This is fucking spooky. You better not be pissing us around. I'm not, I promise. I haven't even been here, have I? It sounds like Gaelic. Gaelic? Who the fuck speaks Gaelic anymore? Well, not many, but they used to. When this was built, I bet they did. The engineer stops the tape. He lights a cigarette. I didn't think this could be real. He has their full attention. There's an idea that sounds can be captured by their surroundings, like a tape recorder stores sounds by using magnets to arrange iron oxide particles on a tape. But instead of the tape, the sound gets saved in an object. Stone tape theory. Yeah, that's what it's called. Are you being serious? Are you saying the tape recorded the playback from this building? Why not? There's a lot of iron ore around here. This building could easily contain iron particles. Why couldn't ancient shields or swords have become magnetized? You wave them about in the middle of an argument and bingo. You've got yourself a house-sized tape recorder. We used to talk about it in college, but it was only ever one of those things we talked about when we dropped acid. I didn't think for a second it might actually be real. Play some more tape. the drummer says. Not for me, I'm out. This sort of thing really gets to me, so I'm gone. Let me know when you're done. The guitarist picks up his things and leaves the room. Once he's gone, the engineer pushes play on the tape. The background talking carries on. Then it goes quiet. They all lean in, straining to hear. Suddenly there's a loud crash and the tape breaks, lashing around and around on the spool. Fuck's sake, that nearly gave me a heart attack. Was that on the tape? I don't think so. It sounded like it came from upstairs. They all look up. The problem with that, the drummer starts, is there isn't an upstairs. Fuck me, this is all getting a little bit Scooby-Doo. It must have come from outside then. The singer heads to the door. When he gets outside, there on the ground is a guitar. It's been smashed to pieces. There's no sign of its owner. From behind him, inside the bothy, comes some noise of loud cries and screams. He rushes back in. He finds an empty room. The instruments are scattered across the floor and the curtains have been pulled from the walls. The only sign they'd been there recently is the tape player. It's still running. The tape seemingly repaired. It is playing out the sounds of the group of people eating. The old roadie takes another long toke of his joint. The singer made it back to London, but he was never the same after that. They couldn't find a trace of the others, so all that was left was their equipment.
What about the tape? Where's that?
Well, after the police finished with it, they returned it to the singer as it was his property. Not sure after that. He went mad and ended up living in a dustbin in the East End somewhere. He died recently. Tragic end to what should have been a great career. A couple of weeks after the roadie's tale, Ed noticed a small advert in the back of one of the trade newspapers for an engineer to go work on some transmitters in the Highlands of Scotland. That's a coincidence, he thought. Included on the list was the Ben Dory station. Something made him pick up the phone and arrange an interview. Being the only suitable applicant, he got the job, and now found himself sitting in the exact same bothy as the one he heard about in the old man's story. It now boasted a bed and a small kitchen. The inside wasn't much warmer than the outside, so he lit a small wood burner in the corner of the room. Whilst not a superstitious man, he nonetheless felt slightly anxious about being in a room where 3 fully grown men had vanished all of those years ago. Sitting in silence, all they could hear was the sound of the rising gale curling around the stone walls. Occasionally the wood burner would surge with the wind and give a small pop or crackle from the rough wood ablaze in it. Picking up his suitcase, he placed it on a small table that stood in the middle of the room. Loosening the belt that held it together, he slipped it off and fiddled with the lock. Eventually, it sprang open and he lifted the lid. Amongst a few clothes and personal possessions he'd packed was his old tape recorder. Carefully lifting it out, he put it on the table and looked at it. Was he really going to do this? Whilst back in London, after he got the job, he started to do some research on the area. In the 17th century, there was a spate of attacks on locals. Turned out it was a clan, much like the Sawney Beans further south, who'd taken to cannibalism to supplement their starvation diet. The war between the clans and the Redcoats had been raging for 40 years at that point, and the English would use famine as a weapon in the war of attrition between the Scots and themselves. To begin with, the local clan turned to consuming human flesh out of necessity, as they were literally starving to death. The English had them pinned to a rugged and barren corner of the Highlands. Eating the soldiers they caught eventually became a way of taking some power back from the brutal invaders. However, the more they did it, the more they came to enjoy it. Soon, it was their preferred meat. Could this be what the band heard on the tapes? It didn't explain their disappearance, but it could prove that stone tape theory was a real phenomenon. He'd get some credit for something other than just being a sound engineer. A discovery that would ensure that his name would forever be linked with the phenomena. He'd be in the sort of audio textbooks he'd like to pall over in his spare time. Brackenbury's phenomena. Yeah, he liked the sound of that. He picked up the suitcase and put it on the floor. Clearing the table, he took the tape recorder and placed it near to the middle as he could without measuring it. Hesitating for an instant, he took 2 fingers and held them over the record and play buttons. Affirming to himself that this really was a good idea, he simultaneously firmly pressed both the keys down until the right-hand cassette spool took up the slack and slowly started turning. He took a few steps backwards, finding his keys he left in the room, locking the door behind him. 2 hours later, the sound of the key in the lock heralded his arrival back at the bothy. The front door swung open. Ed made straight for the bedside table. The tape had come to an end, the buttons sitting neatly in a row. Leaning against the table, he picked up the tape recorder and pressed the rewind button. Slowly at first, the tape started to turn. It gathered speed as the thin ribbon spooled from one side of the cassette to the other. After a minute, the tape came to a shuddering halt, and the button snapped back into place. Putting the machine back on the table, he walked towards the little kitchen. He opened the cupboard door and took out a half-drunk bottle of scotch he'd brought with him. Ed poured himself a large measure. "I think I'm going to need this," he said to himself as he prepared to listen to the tape. He sat back down at the table and placed the glass next to the tape recorder, his index finger wavering over the play button. Picking up the glass, he took a gulp. He resolutely pressed play, and the tape begins to roll. The first 15 minutes were nothing but static hiss of the tape recording in its own motion. He was just starting to feel a bit of an idiot to think that there might be something to this, when he hears what sounds like a distant voice. He leans into the tape recorder, turning the volume up. Amongst the hiss, there it is again. Yes, it's definitely a voice. Then another, muffled but clearly a voice. They're getting louder and louder. He can start to make out the odd word. The heckles on the back of his neck are standing up. The conversation is coming into earshot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 men talking about songs. Oh my God, was this the band? Then came raised voices. An argument? He hears one storm out. Another goes to get him. More discussion. Then other voices, strange, accented voices that seem to come from a different place. There comes a loud crash on the tape. It makes that jump. He reaches towards the machine and just about to turn it off when there is a very clear voice saying,
"Hello, Eddard.
"Hello, Edward.
The sinner of Bither fighting reet.
We've been waiting for you." Ed drops his glass. There are 2 men standing beside him. They are bearded and dressed in a garb from another time. Ed blanches in terror, but before he could say anything, one of them raises a large heavy club and brings it down sharply on Ed's head.
Binsi nagada gumathanacht.
"We will eat well tonight," they say as they drag his limp body away into the shadows.
Stone Tape Theory was written and produced by Tony Hazel. It is read by BC Camplight. This recording is copyright 2 Kittens Publishing, 2024.